Hi everyone, I am Paul and I'm back with Newegg TV. Recently we've been doing a lot of video editing here in the office for our YouTube channel, and we found it necessary to rebuild or replace a few of our computers. Laura actually burnt hers out completely while editing video. So I'm rebuilding my computer today, and we're going to be featuring the Cooler Master HAF 922 case.
I'm going to be using this PC for video editing, but I also need the parts to be cost effective and match up with the Socket 775 Intel motherboard that I already have on hand. For this type of work I spent a little bit more money on a quad-core CPU and 8 gigs of DDR2 memory. A big fast hard drive would be next on my wish list, but for now I'll be recycling the 2 hard drives from my old PC. Here's a quick look at my toolkit. For most builds you can get by with the Phillips head screwdriver alone, but I like to carry a few other shapes and sizes as well. It also helps to have a pair of pliers, some scissors, the all-important static wristband, electrical tape, a soft bristled toothbrush helps to clean off old parts, and my collection of old screws, motherboard standoffs, and zip ties. And a pen.
First we're going to take a closer look at the Cooler Master HAF 922 case that we have here. Pop off the side panel. On the interior of the case we can see the included accessory box. The optical drive bays feature Cooler Master's push-button locking system. You push it in once to lock the drive in, and push again to release it. The PSU mounts at the bottom of the case, and the motherboard tray features a removable paper guide for your standoffs, as well as a CPU cooler replacement hole, which is very handy if you use a third-party aftermarket CPU cooler. Here on the back of the case you can see 2 rubber grommets. These are for routing your water cooling hoses. As far as air cooling, the HAF comes pre-installed with 2 massive 200mm cooling fans. One here is in the top of the case for exhaust, and then there's one in the front of the case right in front of your hard drive bays. Finally, for input-output, on the front of the case we have 2 USB ports, mic and headphone, an E-serial ATA port, power switch, reset switch, and a fan LED switch that will turn your fan LEDs on or off. You should always be very careful of static electricity when you're working with delicate computer parts. You can use an item like a static wristband. You clip it to your computer case, and that way any static that builds up on you is transferred to the case. Mounting your new motherboard directly to the motherboard tray itself is one of the most common mistakes that's made by new computer builders. To avoid this mistake, we use these. They're called motherboard standoffs. They're tiny copper screws, and they simply screw into the motherboard. You want to make sure you align them with the mounting points on the motherboard itself, and that makes sure that you don't short out your new parts. Now that we've installed our motherboard standoffs, we can remove the temporary guide. And before we install the motherboard itself, we're going to install the power supply. These are the input-output ports on the back of your motherboard, and every new motherboard should come with an I/O shield, and it fits nicely over them like that. Our next step is going to be to install this directly into the case. Before you mount the motherboard itself into the case, you'll want to take a look at the heatsink fan that you'll be using for your CPU. A lot of third-party heatsink fans require a backplate to be installed on the motherboard itself. You'll want to do that before you install the motherboard into your case. For the HAF 922 we actually have an open backplate that will let us do that after the motherboard is installed, but not all cases have that feature. Next we'll install the motherboard into the case itself. Simply drop the motherboard in. Line up the input-output ports on the back, and I usually start with hand screwing a few of these in. And when you're bolting down your motherboard, you want the screws to be snug, but not too tight. Next we'll be installing the CPU into the motherboard. This is the most expensive and delicate part of the computer. Be very, very careful not to touch the gold contacts on the back of the CPU. This is a Socket 775 motherboard. First thing we'll do is lift the retaining arm and remove the protective plastic cover. Grip the CPU by the edges, and also be very careful with the pins in the socket. You'll notice there's 2 notches in the edge of the CPU. Line those up with the 2 notches in the socket and drop the CPU in. Remember the keyword zero insertion force. You do not need to press down on the CPU at all. Drop the cover back and the retaining arm. Next we'll be installing our heatsink fan. This is the stock heatsink fan that comes with our Intel CPU. Its job is to conduct heat through this copper base plate off of the CPU itself and radiate it out through the aluminum fins. Always make sure that you have thermal paste when you're installing a heatsink fan. Stock models usually come with it pre-applied. Drop the heatsink fan directly onto the CPU and make sure that you've lined up your mounting brackets. I usually squish it around a little bit to make sure the thermal paste spreads. And for the Intel stock fan, all you need to do is push in each of these mounting brackets. While we still have plenty of room in the case, we're going to go ahead and install our optical and disk drives. We're even old school enough that we're putting a floppy in. Once you slide it into the case, you simply push the locking button and it locks in. If anyone has ever had trouble removing front plates from cases before, this is much improved with the Cooler Master. There are simply 2 finger prongs that you squeeze in and it pops right off. Our hard drives are our only holdout from our previous machine. The HAF 922 has removable hard drive trays. The installation goes something like this.